Hello everyone and welcome to this critical conversation. My name's Ailey and I'm the Learning and Engagement Manager for the University Museums, and I'm going to be the chair of tonight's discussion. And the discussion topic is one that I'm really looking forward to. It is why failure is a good thing. Something that might not immediately strike one as a good thing, but as I think we'll discover this evening, definitely is to be a well-rounded human and all of those sorts of things. So we'll get going. The reason we're doing this critical conversation tonight is because we are hosting an exhibition at the Wardlaw Museum at the moment called First Women UK, which is by the photographer Anita Corbin, and it's a photographic series of 100 portraits of women who were the first in their field to do something, and these achievements are wide-reaching, from sport to music to arts and culture to politics, a bit of everything basically. And it's absolutely right that we celebrate their success and celebrate the fact that these women have been pioneering in their fields. But one of the things that doesn't get spoken about as often on the journey to success is the role that failure plays in it. So that's what we're here to discuss this evening. So what I'm going to do to begin with is introduce our two panelists, and then we'll launch straight into the discussion. So first of all, who's first on my screen? It's Paula. Paula, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Certainly. Hi, everybody. My name's Paula Miles. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Psychology and Neuroscience at St Andrews. I am involved in research in the area of educational psychology. I started that journey working with children with learning differences, but in more recent years, I've switched to looking at the student experience at university and the sorts of things in higher education that can impact our students' experiences with us. I have a big focus on well-being and the sorts of things that we can promote within our university to support the well-being of our students and of our staff. So that's a little bit about me.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Paula. And Greg.
And so I am Greg Morgan. I'm a PhD student in the School of History and also in the School of Management. So I'm across those two departments. And before that, I've been working in research kind of as a professional for 15 years of my life. So ultimately, my PhD focuses on the notion of excellence, really, in the kind of years from 1960s onwards to the mid 90s, realistically. So lots of things there around, obviously, excellence, how people succeed, but obviously the flip side of that is around failure as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So as you can see, if you're tuning in, the range of perspectives that our panelists are coming from this evening, which should make for a really interesting discussion. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you require live captioning for the event, just press the 3 dots on your screen and select that option. And you also have the opportunity to ask our panelists any questions that you might have this evening, so just pop them in the Q&A function as we go along if that's something you would like to do. So to begin with, I thought we could start with perhaps what might be considered a basic point, but it's the definition of failure in this context, because it's not necessarily a word that has just one meaning. I wonder if either of our panelists would like to suggest a way to kick us off on that topic. Paula.
So as an educator, as a teacher, when I initially think of failure, I'm thinking about my students and I'm thinking about them completing a piece of assessment or sitting an exam. And so for me, initially, it's very straightforward. Oh, someone passed or someone failed a piece of work in their assessment. But of course, I suppose it's much more complex than that, and that failure will mean very different things to different people. I suppose one way of thinking about it is to do with one's expectations of themselves and the sorts of things that they could achieve, and whether or not you're living up to those expectations, to those goals that you've set yourself And so one thing that we encounter quite a lot here at university is students coming along and completing pieces of work where we think they've done extremely well, but when they look at that mark, the number doesn't represent how well they thought they would do, or how well they wanted to do, or how well they expected to do. So it's definitely a lot more complex than simply passing or failing something, but rather linked to one's own expectations, one's ambitions, and whether an individual's living up to those.
And if I may, yeah, I think, I mean, in that context, absolutely agree with that. But I think on kind of a deep kind of philosophical level, I'd even question whether the idea of failure is really a thing. You know, it's very much a socially constructed kind of notion of comparing yourself against some kind of strange benchmark. And if you look at the kind of, you know, obviously those contexts where we speak about failure most often is around kind of education and passing tests and exams and things like that. But if you actually look at kind of science and the history of science, most scientists probably look at failure as just simply part of the process. It's how you produce knowledge, and it's absolutely a necessary part of that. And failure is probably never absolute, actually. And I thought a little bit more about things that we actually put the words failed in front of. And obviously, yeah, failed test or exam, you get that. A failed experiment, you get that. You failed relationship, maybe, you get that. But I couldn't actually think of that many more things that we put the word failed in front of, which I thought was quite interesting.
It is actually, because I think, like you say, you can imagine that actually there are many scenarios where we sort of try to measure up to different sort of benchmarks, is the way that you put it. And I think the thing that you picked up on there, and Paula yourself too, the idea that your perspective or the influences around you really do influence how you define failure and what you see as a failure. So it meaning different things in different contexts as well. I guess one of the things that is something to point out is that failure can mean something different if the stakes are higher, for example. It's different to, I don't know, even fail your driving test once when you know you can resit it, something like that. But there are obviously examples peppered throughout history where that's not the case. Greg, I think that you have some experience in your research of those scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one kind of famous kind of example from science is, you know, even Albert Einstein kind of failed in a kind of peer review process. So they kind of submit a paper to a journal for publication, and yeah, Einstein famously got in a real bit of a huff really around the fact that even his paper had been sent out for someone else to review. So I think there's that kind of strange kind of process where you get a lot of success and then all of a sudden you are almost, yeah, shocked by any kind of failure, basically. Whereas obviously there's another kind of interesting concept, I think, as well, in terms of, you know, the people that we think are successful, you know, throughout the history of science. There's actually quite a body of work around kind of multiple independent discoveries. So obviously the people who get all of the attention around kind of like Isaac Newton around calculus, lots of other people were doing the same thing, and you know, he was the one who just got the attention as well. And so did the others fail because they weren't the first, or did they succeed because they did the thing anyway independently?
Absolutely. Again, it comes back to how you define your own success. And I guess there's an interesting thing around the types of failure that people can encounter. And you know, you've talked there about the history of science, and the failure is almost part and parcel of that process, right? It's just expected. And I think the other sort of examples of failure that we think of when we think about I don't know, significant examples are those of entrepreneurs, where, you know, they now have a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but their first business idea fell through, and they tried and tried again, and they made it, and they had a success in their second or third iteration, or that sort of thing. And I guess it comes back to this idea about what the stakes involved are, because great if you have the resource to be able to fail over and over again to then make your multi-billion-dollar success, but that's, again, that's not something that's afforded to everybody. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that idea. Greg?
And I think that's quite a good topical example, because obviously kind of before our eyes we can see kind of Elon Musk has successfully bought Twitter, but whether it actually turns out to be a success is another question. And obviously definitely I think falls into that category of multi-billion-pound successful corporations that go into that story. And I think it's, yeah, the flip side, I think there's part of it which is around, you know, actually cultural capital, really. And, you know, if you have those opportunities, and, you know, you can think about it in terms of not just being good at the thing that you're trying to do, but also knowing the rules of the game and having the resources to be able to play the rules of the game very successfully. So yeah, that's some introductory thoughts on that.
As you can see, this discussion is it can go in many directions. I guess, Paula, from your perspective, you're coming from an educational psychology perspective, and I think there's definitely something to be said about this sort of the attitudes towards failure being developed at a very young age, right? I wonder whether you want to speak to, yeah, how it manifests in kids and the education system and that sort of thing. Yeah,
I think this is something that will probably always be considered with respect to the education field, because as we've said already, there are many ways in which we can fail, and so part of what we need to do for our children is to help them develop the skills that they need to cope when these things don't always go to plan. It's interesting, over the years we've seen changes in approaches to education that kind of maybe reflect looking at this slightly differently. So I remember a change some time back where previously students were given grades, some kind of recognition for the standard of work that they had produced, and for a period they switched that to just not giving specific grades or marks, but simply a tick in a box to say this skill has been achieved, this has been mastered. And it was a really interesting approach. It allows flexibility for children to develop at their own pace, and so you have multiple times to attempt each of those skills or to master each of those objectives, and you get there in your own time. But there were also thoughts about whether that was really an appropriate way of doing it. When you talk to kids, I love it that they'll say things like, well, we know who the fastest kid in the class is, because when we have sports day, they're going to win the running race. They always come first. And maybe there might be a music competition or an art competition, and those are ranked, and kids understand what those rankings mean. And that aspect in some ways was taken away from the academics. And I can see and I can understand some of the reasoning behind that, because you want to support all children to learn in their own time and achieve the best that they can. But at some point, we do need our children to be able to experience what it feels like to not achieve something, I suppose. I very much like the current situation in Scotland, where we have a curriculum for excellence. And one of the main driving forces for this is really celebrating, I suppose, the important role of problem solving in teaching. And that when we're delivering our classes to children, that we need to do so in a way where there are lots of opportunities for them to get stuck into the content and try to solve problems on their own and explore in that way. And some would argue that actually problem solving, developing that skill, is more important than any content that we might teach them, because problem solving skills can then transfer into a whole variety of different areas. One of the most important things about problem solving is that you appreciate that it's completely okay to give something a try and it not work, and you're just going to start again and you're going to try with a different approach. So I'm very much in favor of that type of approach to learning, especially with our younger kids, when we want them to develop confidence and to know that it's okay if something doesn't work the first time, because we're just going to think about it again and try and approach it in a different way the next time round.
Yeah, and I think there's something around, you can almost never replicate any kind of thing. So any kind of assessment, any kind of thing that you are assessed for and that you may pass or fail or be ranked or evaluated, you can probably never actually recreate those exact scenarios in the same way. And obviously a lot of what science does is try to replicate that and kind of create kind of a randomized controlled trial in order to do that. But in real life, in the real world, it's any kind of assessment, any kind of thing that you pass or fail is just a reflection of where you are on that particular day under any of those particular circumstances. And it's very, very useful, I think, to be benchmarked and know where you are and kind of know how far you have to go in a way to be excellent and to master a thing. But as Paula says, I mean, it's absolutely can be absolutely disastrous, I think, for some people who don't learn how to fail. The people who are the cleverest in school and then kind of all of a sudden go to university and are no longer the cleverest in the class, basically. That's a big shock to the system. And again, another kind of contemporary example, I think you can almost see that with kind of Cristiano Ronaldo's interview last night. It's obviously one of the most successful footballers, but when things stop to go that way, it becomes quite tricky. And it's might be a result of being so successful that this kind of slight drama at Manchester United is sort of unfolding.
Yeah, I think this is it, isn't it? It's almost like if people don't encounter those barriers, those stumbling blocks, the removal of failure doesn't. It's not the solution, is it? It seems that that's not the way to develop well-rounded individuals, really. It's more equipping people to deal with the outcome rather than removing it altogether. Because I think, like you say, Greg, there's this bit around some people will thrive once they know where they have to go with something, right? There's that determination that comes with, well, I didn't quite hit that time. Next time I'm gonna ace it. Other people do not have such a determined approach to it. It can be catastrophic. And again, does it come back to that idea of perspectives? Because you said there, Greg, that idea of children who have been the cleverest in the class the whole way through their school lives go to university and they're not performing to the level that they expect, or is it the level that their families expect? Is it the level that their peers are anticipating? What is it there, do you think?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. I think you've probably touched on why this is such a complex and difficult thing, because not only do we have our own expectations of ourselves, but others have expectations of us too. And so at times we would feel like we're not only, I guess, potentially letting ourselves down, but we might be letting our families down, our friends down, our community, our society in some way. So I think it's a really good point that you've raised, that it's not completely individual, this experience with failure, and that actually that wider context that you're in will have a massive impact in terms of how that failure is addressed, the steps that are taken, the lessons that are learned, how proactive one's reaction to those situations might be. Definitely a very complex environment going on there.
I think that's yeah, like you say, it's in no way is it a simple topic at all. I wonder then if we're saying that removing failure is not the right approach. The right approach in this scenario is to to help to equip people to deal with the fallout of failure. How do we do that? How do I'm seeing people laughing. I like to ask big questions.
Well, I mean,
see if we know the answer.
I think there's a flip side to this as well, and it's partly how you help people to deal with success as well. In terms of actually, you know, I've kind of thought a little bit about this, and the way that, you know, the successes that I've enjoyed the most have been almost the most unexpected ones, the ones that I felt I didn't quite deserve. Whereas the ones that I kind of thought, like, I've prepared for this, I've worked for this, I've done these things, actually, yeah, it's great. It's kind of a validation of the work that I've done, but it's not like this kind of rush of exhilaration to think that I've done it. And I think it's almost very much a kind of, yeah, treat things as a test of where you are on any particular day. And it can't be the be all and end all. It can't define you. You can, in most scenarios, try again, and actually don't overplay the successes and don't overplay the failures, realistically. And I think the way that we've kind of structured society now, under kind of very kind of so-called meritocratic lines, is actually created a lot more opportunities for failure. And that kind of touches on what kind of Paula said before, but everything is assessed, everything is quantified, everything is measured at various points through our life. And it becomes almost a quantified self, really, I think. And to try and push back a little bit from that and actually just take these assessments as what they are intended to be, rather than a kind of badge that you were, would be a good start, I think.
I really love that idea. As a teacher myself, you know, we're setting assessments because there are certain things that we want our students to know and understand, and we need to get a feel for where their level of understanding is. That's quite important to us in our roles. And when students achieve grades that they maybe didn't expect they would get, they're disappointed with them. As an educator, I see that as an opportunity for learning. Really, failure is just a form of learning, I think, at the end of the day. And so it's an opportunity to look at it and go, okay, well, I thought I knew it. I guess I didn't know it as well as I did. Or I thought I knew how I had to write that answer, but I guess it wasn't what my lecturer was after. And that gives you an opportunity to then explore that, talk to your teacher, find out where did you go wrong here. And I actually think without experiencing those things, we don't really have a very good understanding of what we do and don't know, of what we are successful and what we aren't. And so, I mean, I know it's very easy to say that. I could just sit here and say failure is a fabulous thing because ultimately it's this lovely journey and you'll end up better for it. But I genuinely think that's true. You know, at the end of the day, I think that failure allows you to identify your strengths and weaknesses. It allows you opportunities to try again at something and see if you can do better. It also provides opportunities to identify things that maybe just aren't for you. and actually that's completely fine as well. So I think it's an extremely valuable thing. And in terms of how we help ourselves to deal with failure, I guess a big part of that is in the schooling system, with our kids are coming through primary school and secondary school, and the way that we deal with things that they find challenging. I know that at the moment, over the past years, there's been a push for understanding growth and fixed mindsets, and that's where we're encouraging at primary school level for children to not experience failure and then just decide that's it and it's all over with, but actually to try something using problem solving skills, realize it doesn't work, realize that in the classroom setting that's completely fine because no one expected it to work the first time, you're going to try again. And that helps to create this growth mindset where you think, okay, I've hit an obstacle, I didn't quite get it, but it's okay, I won't give up, I'm going to keep going. And so I'm sure that our education system plays a really important role and does an extremely good job at trying to create this sort of mindset and approach in our kids, which will serve them super well as they go through future years.
Yeah, I think that there's an example kind of from, some work I've been doing recently about kind of chemists, basically, from the 1960s onwards, and George Porter, who kind of won the Nobel Prize for chemistry in the 1960s at some point. He'd been working for ages on this problem that he was trying to solve, but couldn't crack it in the lab, and it actually just took him, he visited this factory in Preston, like a Siemens light factory, and just had this kind of wave of inspiration almost, and then problem solved, basically, which won him a Nobel Prize just from wandering around and looking at some stuff. And it's just that kind of ability to stay connected with the purpose and the point of it, and be able to, yeah, accept almost those bits of inspiration and follow them down a certain path. And I think, yeah, if we put too much emphasis on failure, you do just give up. And having those kind of problem solving things and that ability to go, actually, this isn't impossible, then that's the right way to go about it, I think.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that has been sort of striking me as we've been speaking is this idea of how best to phrase it, that if you see your achievements, if you're someone who has, I don't know, traditionally done well against assessments or whatever it is, if you see your achievements as who you are at your very core, if you self-identify so strongly with the things that you have done, that you have received success for, the crushing blow of something going not your way is almost even more painful, isn't it? It's these stories of, yeah, people who have, I don't know, dedicated their lives to academia, say, and then it comes to them getting their PhD and then they don't end up in a postdoc or whatever it might be. It's that idea that if something has been part of the very fibre of your being, it holds so much more at stake, really, than if if it's part of what you do. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge part of that in academia, particularly because there is kind of that kind of identification of it being your life's work and everything that you do, and the idea that it's a vocation and not just a job that you kind of leave. And I think there's lots of examples like that, but it's not quite from the science strands, but it's probably a better known and still science related. So obviously 1960s, we sent some men to the moon, and then obviously Buzz Aldrin came back, and obviously that was a hugely successful thing, maybe mankind's greatest achievement at the point in time, who knows. But yeah, obviously once you've been to the moon and once you've had such huge success, what do you do? I mean, and obviously Buzz Aldrin had a terrible time for about 20 years following that, because quite simply coming back down to earth is quite difficult. And if you can't sustain those levels of success, if you've won a Nobel Prize when you're 30 something years old, what do you do with the rest of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly wouldn't know what to do if I just returned from the moon. That's for sure. I think that's it though, isn't it? It's that bit about, it not being the culmination of something, right? Whatever your big success is, it's yet another step along the road to something else. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. I mean, I guess, like you say, Paula, the main thing that really we can do is change that mindset to bolster people to see failure as an opportunity, and even maybe there needs to be something done around success as well. Where do you go from here?
I love that as an idea, because I don't think many people can maintain a high level of success at all times. I mean, I just don't think that's really particularly realistic for people. And so knowing that and understanding that probably is helpful. I think it probably ties into resilience as well. I'm sure these things must be interconnected. If you can help to develop resilience and become strong when things don't go your way, you can definitely be upset about it, and you can be upset about it for a while. That's completely fine. But know that eventually you'll be able to get through that, and consider where you might go next. I think that's really, if it's not too silly, just to give a personal example, when we were given this topic and I was thinking about failure, the first thing that sprung to my mind, I mean, when I think about my life overall, there's plenty of things that just haven't worked out, and there's been lots of wonderful things that have happened along the way. The very first thing I thought about was that I failed a module at university. And that was a first for me. I was never the best student, but I hadn't really failed quite like this before. It was an impressive fail. And I think about what that did to me and how I responded to that. And I thought it was really interesting because actually in the big scheme of things, that's such a tiny part of my life. It was a single module. And really, there are other things that have happened to me that you could say more significantly didn't work out and didn't go in my favor. And yet those are not the things that spring to mind right away. And so I'm sure that part of it just comes with experience and living for a while and experiencing different types of failures at different stages in your life, that you learn to deal with things differently. You know, probably the biggest thing for me was that I was going to be a vet. I dreamed my whole life of being a vet. I went to veterinary school and I didn't get into second year. I just didn't make the grades and I was out. And so I was still hugely determined, and I went back to university to do a science degree, and I was going to enter through their second point after I got my BSc. But I never did that because actually I discovered other things during my degree that I loved even more. And really, when I think about it, that was probably the biggest challenge I might have faced, particularly at that point in my life, because that had genuinely, I'm a person with a plan, that had been my life's dream. and it just was gone. And then things after that, I went on multiple different paths. And I think allowing myself to try different things helped me deal with the fact that not everything has to work out, because there's probably something out there that actually you might love even more once you get a chance to discover it. So I find that fascinating, that those really big things that have impacted who I am today are not the things that spring to mind, because I just think of them as being opportunities that allowed me to find new things. And the only thing I keep focusing on is this module that I got a D on. I really need to move past that.
No, it's funny when you were saying that there, Paula, that I was trying to think about, the same thing for myself in personal examples. And the first thing I thought of as well was the maths prelim that I failed at school, aged 15. And yeah, it's one of those things. Sometimes it gives you a bit of a kick into action. That's what that one did for me. I realized I'd spent the whole of my year doodling album covers onto my maths jotter rather than doing any maths. Don't do that, kids. But it did prove to me that, yep, that's not the route for you. Not that I ever considered it was, but yeah, it's funny, the idea that you remember earlier failures more clearly because they are a bigger part of your life at that time. That's fascinating. Makes total sense to me. Gosh, yeah, funny that. So what I'm trying to think of the best place to go from here. One of the things that I would love to ask you both about is the motto of the University of St Andrews, because we are having this discussion as members of staff and students here at the University of St Andrews, and our university motto is ever to excel. What's everyone's take on the motto? What do we think it says?
I mean, this is very much kind of my big topic. I mean, excellence. It's another thing that we can't even really define what it is, because on one hand it's just kind of being really good, but the other side of it is to be competitive and to be better than something else, basically. So it's quite a problematic word, and my entire PhD is focused around this word, basically, and it's a strange twist of fate that I've ended up in St Andrews doing that, which wasn't on my radar to begin with. I didn't check every university's motto before I started, but it's a very problematic word, I think, if you look at it deeply. And I think actually, if you look at it against yourself and think actually just do the best that I can, yeah, fine, and to keep pushing yourself. But if you break it down, if you break it down and look too much and look to play the game too much, then it becomes quite a pernicious thing. And actually, You know, I think you're never always going to excel, you know, in either sense of the word, basically. And a lot of what we do is kind of much more about doing things under pressure than it is actually in terms of being able to do the thing itself. So that a lot of that kind of dynamic of assessment and evaluation comes in there, and that's a different thing. And it's kind of excel at the thing you're actually meant to be good at, or excel at being good at exams. And it's quite interesting as well as you move through the educational system. You know, you go through kind of GCSEs and A levels where there are, you know, many different grades you can get. You do an undergraduate degree, there are fewer classifications that you can get. You do a master's, you're just into the pass-fail distinction type setup, and then PhD, you just pass-fail. And then beyond that, it's research excellence framework territory. But yeah.
If I'm thinking about, if we're using the word excel, then for me, and maybe I'm thinking about this now as a mum and with kids who'll go maybe to university one day in the near future, I would want them to excel at trying their best. I'd like them to excel at taking opportunities as they come along, and even if it's something that puts you out of your comfort zone, I'd really like them to excel at asking for help. You know, these are the sorts of things, I guess, if we want to think about excel broadly, and if we want to see a positive aspect to this motto, if we step back a smidgy from the simple academic aspect of it, but just all these things in life that we could excel at, as long as it comes, you know, with the caveat that you might try your best, you might excel at trying your best, it might not work, things might not always turn out the way you might like, they might fail, but you've tried to, you know, you've done that to the best that you can. And yeah, for me, that I think is probably the most important thing. I think we should look at that motto very broadly.
Yeah, I think that as you were speaking there, Paula, it's that thing about a holistic view of it as ever to excel in all different ways of your life, whether that's, yeah, ever to excel as a friend, as a, you know, as a student, as a whoever, whatever you might be. I think that's really important, isn't it? I wonder, as a sort of becoming to a close kind of question, whether Greg and Paula, you might like to suggest some top tips for anyone listening who may have to deal with failure in the future. How would you suggest that someone deals with failure or success with the after the discussions that we've had this evening?
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? I think I try to think of it, I guess, holistically, like you were saying, Ailey. So think of things in the big picture. Try to always imagine things in that bigger picture scheme, and accept that things not going right, things failing, that is just a standard thing that we experience, that it's completely okay to be distraught about that for a while. I mean, that's a completely good and normal reaction. Then a part of you in the background thinking, what can I gain from this? So, you know, what have I learned from this opportunity? And see it as not right away, because it'll be too hard, you know, maybe right away, but down the track, you can reflect on it and think, well, I might have learned a couple of valuable things here that might really help me in the future. It might help you decide that you don't ever want to study maths at university level because prelim didn't go well, or it might allow you to think, okay, there's reasons why that didn't work. I'm going to figure out what they are. Chat to someone about it. If it's a piece of work at university or at school, go and talk to your teacher, your lecturer, and ask them, where did I go wrong here? What hasn't quite worked? And give yourself an opportunity to try again. I think understanding that there are, these things do happen, that is completely normal, and just at some point along the way, look back and embrace what you've gained from that experience.
I think Failure, I would say, it's very useful to, it's useful to keep in mind that it is only a kind of reflection of where you are in any one given day. And in most cases, it's not actually a reflection on your ability to do the thing or your ability to have done the work almost. I think there's, if you try and do a marathon, obviously, if you try and do a marathon, you wouldn't take it on without doing some training. But also things can go wrong even if you've done all the training in the world. And a huge amount of it is still always going to be luck. And, it is that point of actually, fine, I wouldn't recommend doing too many marathons because it's, you'll ruin your knees. But on the success side as well, I think it's to, if we are ever to excel, we should excel wisely and excel humanely, and kind of have in mind that, again, some of it is down to luck, some of it is down to circumstance, and I think we should all kind of check our privilege on both sides of it in a way. If we fail, there are kind of systematic and institutional factors at play which we can beat, but we probably need to think about them a little bit more than others need to. And if you're very successful, you need to probably look back at that as well and think, actually, we have ultimately benefited and had a path that we are able to follow quite straightforwardly. But like I say, enjoy the successes as well. Don't let that stop anyone enjoying the success, because but don't overdo it. It is very much a case of understand that success is part of the process just as much as failure is.
I like the piece of advice not to run many marathons because it will ruin your knees. Can I take that as I don't have to run any marathons, because that would suit me best?
I can give you that seal of approval right now.
Fantastic, Greg. I'm just really conscious about my knees. No, it is. It's one of those things, and I think that bit there that you picked up on around circumstance and privilege and how you've gotten to the place that you've gotten to. I think it's really important to keep those things in mind as you go through life, anyway, right? But to have that understanding and awareness that the thing that you've excelled at, like you say, is a reflection of your circumstances, how you've done at a specific point in time, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're, I don't know, more worthy of anything than someone else who's not done as well, because there can be a whole host of reasons why that is, and a note again, I guess, for people who are educators who do teach, and making sure that there is that holistic look at a person and not defining them by their successes or failures. Oh gosh, I am sad to say that we've come to the end of this discussion, because there's just so much we could talk about. But I think ending on a note of what to bear in mind and to not define yourself by your successes or failures is probably quite a nice place to end. So thank you both so much for taking part in this conversation. It's been fantastic, and thanks to everybody who's been tuning in.